सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत् सत्येन दीपयेत् ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत् सत्येन दीपयेत् ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत् सत्येन दीपयेत् ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत् सत्येन दीपयेत् ॐ
My dear brothers and sisters, the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. The title of today's session is The Needed Synthesis. To put it in its proper context, when the mother came with her husband for the first time to Pondicherry on the 29th of March 1914, their stay was short, but during that short stay was initiated a literary activity which is of great significance in the spiritual history of the world. The short stay of the mother and her husband, the Richards, triggered the publication of a monthly journal, the Arya. Sri Aurobindo knew that one of his missions in life, the major mission of his life, was to share with the world the wisdom that only he could give. This is something that was revealed to him by Sri Krishna when he was in prison. But he was as if, waiting for some sort of a trigger to be provided. He was full up with the spiritual wisdom that he had to share, but then it needed that little stimulus for that tsunami of wisdom to be poured out. And this activity continued for 6.5 years. Now the first issue was published on Sri Aurobindo's birthday in 1914 on the 15th of August. And as one can imagine, in the first issue, there would be something about why that journal is being started at all. And one can understand that in view of the aims and objectives of that journal, which the three of them had decided upon. The objectives of starting that journal were to make a systematic study of the deepest truths of existence, and secondly, which was very important, was to work out a synthesis of the major religious traditions of the world, both Eastern and Western, and an unwritten objective, which Sri Aurobindo mentioned later on, was to use the past as a foundation for providing thought for the future. So a blueprint was created for the future of the world, using the past as the foundation, the best and the most vital components of the past. This has been something which runs throughout Sri Aurobindo's thought, that he has always been rooted in tradition, rooted in the past, but has not been restricted by it, and his assimilation of the past has always been very critical and constructive, in the sense that he has accepted a lot from it without reservation, and also not hesitated to reject, but he has accepted because he knew why he was doing it, and he has also rejected knowing fully well why he is doing it. So it has been a conscious exercise of critical assimilation of the past, and at the same time to go beyond it to construct the future. In one of his pregnant expressions, he says that the past is our foundation, the present is the material, and the future is the summit. So the present is the material on which we have to work to construct the future, for which the past provides us a foundation, but at the same time we have to have a vision of that future that we want to construct, that is the summit which we want to reach. So now, if these were the objectives, and one of the objectives, as you can see, was to work out a synthesis of the major religious traditions of the world, it was quite pertinent to raise the question about why this synthesis was at all necessary. And when one brings out a magazine like that, one tries to use different formats to talk about different things that seem necessary, and here the format chosen was to have a question, and the column was called Question of the Month, and this column continued for 6 months. So during these 6 months, 6 different questions were raised and answered. The question that was raised in the first issue, published on the 15th of August 1914, was why is the synthesis at all necessary? The question was worded, what is the synthesis needed at the present time? We need a synthesis, but what is the type of synthesis that we need? And the answer that Sri Aurobindo gives in this 1 page or so is that basically we have to work out the synthesis of the heart and the mind. Here, he has used heart for the feelings on which faith is based, and mind for the intellect or the thinking part of the mind. So that here's what is called the mind. So basically it's the synthesis of the head and the heart which was necessary. Now, to understand why this synthesis of head and heart was necessary, one has to see what are the 2 sort of major products of the head and the heart, between which there is very often a conflict. The feelings pull us towards what feels good right here and now, whereas the thinking part of the mind tries to warn us if there is any harm, any risk, any evil involved in what we feel like doing. So that is sort of an everyday experience. But this applies, say for example, I feel like eating more, the heart says eat more, but my mind, the intellect tells me, no, you have eaten enough, don't be greedy. Eating more than is necessary may give you indigestion, pain in the tummy. In the long run, it may make me fat. All those things. So the mind gives me a warning. The mind, that is the intellect, the thinking part of the mind, gives me a warning. But while this is true at the individual level, this also applies to the collective level, to societies as a whole. And this can be particularly understood in light of the history of Europe, starting with the Dark Ages, and from there moving on to the European Renaissance, and reaching that stage when Sri Aurobindo started, and the mother decided to start this journal, the Arya. In context of that, we can understand that. Now, Europe went through a phase of Dark Ages for more than 1,000 years, starting somewhere around the end of the Roman Empire, at the beginning of the Christian era, and then going on till about the 16th century. A very long period of dark ages, and during this naturally something was happening, and what was happening was that religion was acquiring a greater importance in life, more and more importance, and the result was that the thinking came to get fossilized around the faith as enshrined in Christianity, and this also gave a lot of authority to the clergy. So there were two things which emerged from it. One was not just faith but also dogma. That is an assertion that whatever is there in the scripture is the last word, and you cannot question it. Faith cannot be questioned. So it led to a dogma, and it also gave a lot of authority, and respect for the authority is also a sort of a universal part of any period which we call dark ages. So respect for authority, and authority further asserts some dogmas, and this became the characteristic. But then eventually there will come individuals who will challenge this, who will question this, and when their number grows sufficiently big, then that would usher in the age of reason. That's what Aurobindo has gone into all this in the human cycle. So that's what happened in Europe, and by the 16th century these numbers were sufficiently big to be able to start a new type of an intellectual movement in which there was the freedom of thought. You could challenge dogma, and the spirit of inquiry could breathe in fresh air without being challenged by authority. And the result of this was the growth of modern science, and that led to technology, and that in turn led to the Industrial Revolution, and all this so revolutionized our lives, made our lives so comfortable, made transport and communication so quick and easy, that mankind was hypnotized by this development. And even those of us who have some reservations about modern science would be very unwilling to give up all the comforts that it has given us. But then this led to another tendency, and that was that science came to develop a dogma of its own. And what was that dogma? That if something is not rational, if it doesn't fall within the purview of reason, it cannot be true. So anything which is not rational cannot be true. So reason came to define the boundaries of truth, which is not again rational. So a very irrational dogma came to be a part of science, and that in itself also started having another characteristic, authority. So which means that the two characteristics which it had rejected during the beginning of European Renaissance, science itself came to acquire as it grew, and in its influence and its impact, the science itself came to acquire the very same two characteristics, dogmas of its own and authority. Now, this is sort of the context in which it is. So now Aurobindo has talked about the need for a synthesis of these two streams. Why? Because if there is something common between faith and science, it is that both are trying to pursue truth, and truth is always one, which means obviously that they have looked at two different aspects of the truth, and therefore what is important is to work out a synthesis which will be for the overall welfare of mankind. So that was sort of the context in which this happened. Now, just to sort of now make it a little lighter before we get into the passage itself, let's look at both these things, the faith and reason. Faith is essentially a matter of the heart, whereas reason is the product of the head. So we're talking about basically with the head and the heart, the mind and the heart. So that is what the conflict we are looking at. So now when we say that I have faith, we say that yes, my faith is there, this faith is unshakable. But then you might have heard of that story that for a long time it was not raining, the way we have gone through recently in Delhi. For a long time it did not rain. So it was decided that if we perform a particular sacrifice, a particular type of yajna, and have a havan, chant certain mantras, then it will bring rain. So the decision was taken, and a lot of people flocked to that place where the havan was going on because they all wanted it to rain. But in that whole crowd, there was only one little boy who had an umbrella with him. So then they asked him, why have you brought the umbrella? It's not raining. He said, but this ritual will bring rain, and that's why I brought the umbrella. So in fact, only this boy had that faith, which others were actually lacking. Now coming to the limitations of reason. And reason, which we have a tendency to place on a very high pedestal because it has given us all science and technology, is something which itself we don't always understand well. Aurobindo has said, somewhere else in another context, that for reason, the starting point has to be some data. You cannot reason in a vacuum. You have to start with some facts, and the data should be correct and complete. So starting with as correct and complete a data as possible, you process it through reason, and after processing it through reason, you arrive at generally more than one conclusion which can be drawn from the same data, and then you accept only one of these conclusions. Now that is where the irrational part of reason begins, because the same data can give you more than one conclusion, but when you accept only one, there is no proper reason for it. You may accept the one which is a simpler conclusion. We have a tendency to accept a simpler conclusion rather than a complex one. Out of all the possible conclusions, you may accept one for which you already have some prejudice. You like that conclusion. Or the third reason could be for accepting it, which is not rational in itself. That is the way people mostly think during that period in history, which means it is the accepted paradigm, or to put it loosely, that is the fashionable way to think. So that's why you accept that. So reason can be sort of tricky. So when we say that we have reached a conclusion by reasoning, actually we have started with some data and then processed it through reason, and then arrived at many conclusions if we have really used reason properly, and then gone to the irrational process of selecting one. And for selecting one, none of these, the prejudice or the collective way of thinking or the acceptable paradigm or the simplicity of the conclusion, none of these by itself is enough to say that therefore should be true. So which means that therefore in science conclusions always remain tentative. But the fact is that these tentative conclusions give us a certain working knowledge, and on the basis of that we have been able to land the man on the moon. But the fact is that reason itself has limitations. That's what I'm trying to bring out. And to show that how you can reach more than one conclusion from the same data, very often I sort of talk about it to children, and I can see one child here. I don't know whether he'll respond anyway. But suppose I'm in Ram is told to go and deliver a parcel to Shyam. He's given the address, told that this is the place where you have to go and deliver it. Now Ram goes there but comes back. He says Shyam was not at home, so he couldn't deliver the parcel. How do you know that he was not at home? The door was locked. Now firstly, is the data correct and complete? Was the door really locked? Some doors look locked from outside, but actually they are not locked. When you turn the key. So you can't be very sure whether the door is really locked. Secondly, did the house have only one door? Is the data complete? Maybe this door was locked, another door was open. Did it have only one door? And then, if you stimulate the children a bit, that what could he have done to make a little more sure whether Shyam is actually at home or not, then they'll give you many answers. They'll tell you that you could have seen whether there's a light on, whether the fan is running, whether there's some noise coming from inside. And of course, these days they'll say, we'll try to call him on the phone, and so on and so forth. So all those things, things they'll give you, which will make the data more and more complete. Now suppose all this was done, the data was as complete as it could be, and still the conclusion is Shyam is not at home. Now, but is this the only conclusion that can be drawn from this data? No, because it's also quite possible that he's very deep asleep. It's also possible that he's unconscious, and it's also possible he's dead. He's inside but dead. Now all these are possible and are compatible with all the data that we have. But still, why do we choose the conclusion that he's not at home? Because that seems to be the most likely. So we are going purely by a probability, which is intuitive in nature, is not rational. So sort of intuitive probability, probably he's not at home. Now, which means that you can draw more than one conclusion. But then the starting point has to be correct. And then if you discover that the address given to the person was wrong, he had not actually gone to Shyam's house but somebody else's house, then the whole thing collapses. Okay? So that is the limitation of reason. So now with this background, now let's see what we have on this page. The needed synthesis. Undoubtedly that of man himself. The synthesis that we need is that of man. Man means different parts of the being. The harmony of his faculties is the condition of his peace, their mutual understanding and helpfulness, the means of his perfection. At war, they distract the kingdom of his being. The victory of one at the expense of another maims his self-fulfillment. So, if different parts of the being are at war with each other, there's a possibility that there may be a victory of one at the expense of another. The way faith was victorious during the Dark Ages and reason became victorious, the intellect became victorious during the era of science, European Renaissance, victory of either of them at the expense of another maims his means human beings' self-fulfillment. The peculiar character of our age is the divorce that has been pronounced between reason and faith. They have been sort of separated completely. They have divorced each other. The logical mind and the intuitive heart, they have been divorced from each other. At first, the declaration of war between them was attended by painful struggles, a faith disturbed or skepticism dissatisfied. When a couple starts fighting, are not getting along well, before they go in for a divorce, they fight. They have many quarrels. So here also there was a quarrel, and when it was the stage of that quarrel, a war was declared, say during the early stages of European Renaissance. When the war was declared between the head and the heart, it was attended by painful struggles. And what did that lead to? A faith disturbed, which means the faith was terribly disturbed at its authority being questioned, or a skepticism dissatisfied, or the skepticism that is a tendency to not believe unless it is rational. That skepticism was dissatisfied by the attitude taken by faith. So the two partners which were quarreling, they both were dissatisfied, they were both unhappy, they were both miserable in their own way. Faith because it was disturbed, and rationality because its skepticism was dissatisfied. But now their divorce has created exaggerated tendencies. Now that the divorce is complete, they are living independently, but then what has that done? That has created exaggerated tendencies which impoverish human life by their mutual exclusiveness. They have led to an impoverishment of human life itself, because they tend to be mutually exclusive. You can have either one or the other, you cannot have both. On the one side, a negative and destructive critical spirit. That is, if you are using primarily your head, you are a rationalist. Then you have a critical spirit, but which is destructive in its ultimate effect. On the other, an imaginative sentiment which opposes pure instinct. On the other hand, you are very sentimental. You give full free play to your imagination. That is what the faith and faith and the heart are about. And the faith is founded on dreams to the sterile fanaticism of the intellect. So the foundation of faith, because of being purely imaginative and sentimental, and opposed to pure instinct, because faith can be also a matter of instinct. Somewhere deep within I know it, which means that the soul is not being sufficiently approached. We are not sufficiently in contact with the deepest part of the being, which Aurobindo has not talked about much here, but that is understood if we look at the thrust of the Arya as a whole, that the two will not be able to reconcile and achieve a true synthesis unless they have an anchor. And that anchor is that divine within. That is around which both the head and the heart can anchor, and that is the one which will then help both work together and cooperate with each other. So that is what can seal the divorce, bring them together, bring the divorced couple together again. So pure sentiment and imagination is not the solution, which faith often uses, but what we need is pure instinct. Pure instinct comes from that deepest self. On the other hand, faith tends to be founded on what? On what looks like dreams to the sterile fanaticism of the intellect. So the intellect itself has its own fanaticism, of own brand of fanaticism, and to it, the imaginative sentiment of the one who is using his heart, depending upon his heart, looks like dreams. Sapno mein khoye hue ho, lost in dreams, come down to earth, get real. That is the tendency which the fanaticism of the intellect has when it responds to this type of imaginative sentiment. Yet a real divorce is impossible. Science could not move a step without faith and intuition, and today it is growing full of dreams. So it means that that has not prevented science from acquiring some of the same things which it criticizes. That is, it has its own dreams. Science always had its dreams. Even today we are dreaming that maybe by using science we will be able to prolong life. Instead of accepting the biblical 70, man can expect to live, say, 5,000 years. Those type of dreams are being talked about. One science had a dream that we'll land on the moon. That was fulfilled. So science has always had dreams, and it is on the type of dreams that scientists have that science fiction is all based. So science has its own dreams, but more importantly, what says, science could not have moved a step without faith and intuition. Because it's when a scientist starts with a question, he starts with not just a question, he also starts with an intuition about what he is likely to find. We don't confess it as scientists. But all the same, the person knows that although I'm supposed to remain objective and dispassionate throughout the research, but somewhere deep within the person has a feeling that this is what is likely to be, like this is what is I'm probably going to find. So there is an intuition at work. It is because the person wants to verify that intuition rather than purely ask a question that he goes, and he has faith that the type of research I am doing and ultimately the conclusions I will reach will be true. That again requires faith, because we thought that the entire process of reasoning does not lead to just one conclusion. So once again faith comes in. We have faith in one conclusion, we accept that and reject the others. So without faith and intuition, science could not move one step. And scientists have often confessed that actually they got the best of their ideas, which led to breakthroughs, in a flash of intuition. It was not through systematic research which moves 1 millimeter at a time, extending what is already known by a little bit at a time. That is not what leads to breakthroughs. Breakthroughs have been the result of something radically different, unimaginable, which came to a person in an intuitive flash, and then the person thought, why not try to verify it scientifically? So that is how all science has grown. So science could not move a step without faith and intuition, and today it is growing full of dreams. On the other hand, religion could not stand for a moment if it did not support itself by intellectual presentation, however inadequate, of profound truths. So, when religion has been presented to the general public, the spiritual master experienced it. He experienced those truths, but nobody else can experience the truths simultaneously. But then at the same time, he wanted to share these truths with the general public. He may be only a spiritual master, or he may end up becoming the founder of a religion. But the fact is that he had the experience, and then he wanted to pass on these truths because he thought that they have a real value in life. They can help organize our life better. So he wanted to pass these on. Now, he could not say, I have experienced it and therefore you have to believe it. He had to make at least some sort of an intellectual effort, intellectual presentation out of it. So all scriptures are to some extent an intellectual presentation of the spiritual master's experience. Experience itself cannot be defined. Experiences of the infinite, the words being used are finite, but still religion could not stand for a moment if it did not support itself by the intellectual presentation, however inadequate, of profound truths. Today we see it borrowing many of its weapons from the armory of its opponent. Now that the opponent, that the science, has grown pretty strong, today we see religion borrowing many of the same weapons from the armory of its opponent. For example, it is trying to rationalize spiritual truths. Do you believe in God? No, I don't, because I don't see him, says this skeptic. So this person tells him, okay, but then what is the alternative if to the creation? How did it all begin if there was no creator? So the skeptic said it could have been an accident. So this person who has faith tells him that accident can only lead to chaos. Suppose a monkey sits at the typewriter or computer and just taps the keys. Do you think it will create accidentally a poem? Or if somebody passing on this road starts throwing bricks in this direction, will it accidentally lead to this hall? No. If there is any order created, that will only lead to the monkey tapping there will just lead to a jumble of alphabets, and the bricks being thrown here will lead to a heap of bricks. That is what can happen accidentally. Anything orderly presupposes an intelligent design behind it. So if a little hall or a poetry cannot be created accidentally, how could this entire universe have been created accidentally, which follows certain laws? The scientist himself believes those laws. The law discovered today we feel will be valid even after 1,000 years. So there's a consistency in these laws, and that is what is keeping this universe running. So how could this orderly universe could have come into being without a creator? It could not have been an accident. So, which means they are using the same weapon of rationality. Faith is using the same weapon to convince the skeptic. So we are borrowing many of its weapons from the armory of its opponent. And then suppose still the person is not convinced, says, okay, but do you have proof? Do you have proof for the existence of God or something like that? He says, okay, but then how rational is it to conclude from absence of proof the proof of absence? Absence of proof is not proof of absence. So once again the same tool of rationality is being used. So rationality is used to explain spiritual truths. If the person is still not convinced, then the same tool of rationality he is confronted with. He is told that I don't have proof to prove, but do you have proof to prove that God does not exist? Or is it rational to believe that if proof is absent, it constitutes proof of absence? So you can use rationality to prove truths which are beyond reason. You can rationalize them, and you can also challenge a person who is not convinced with rationality. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is saying here, that today we see it means religion, borrowing many of its weapons from the armory of its opponent. The chief weapon is rationality. But a right synthesis in virtue of a higher and reconciling truth can alone dissipate their mutual misunderstandings and restore to the race its integral self-development. But it's not this type of to and fro exchanges which can lead to anything constructive. What we need is a synthesis, a higher and reconciling truth. A truth which includes all aspects of the truth if possible. If not, at least it is less incomplete than either of these. That is what can dissipate mutual misunderstandings and restore to the race, that is the human race, its integral self-development. The synthesis then of religious aspiration and scientific faculty as a beginning, and in the resultant progress and integrality also of the inner existence. So what we need, what is the needed synthesis? That was the question. What is the type of synthesis we need? The synthesis of religious aspiration and scientific faculty. That is the synthesis that is required as a beginning. And what would be the result? The result would be an integrality also of the inner existence. Inner existence means, once again, the hint is towards the soul, which means that you will be able to integrate the superficial parts of the being, the head and the heart, with what is within. Love and knowledge, the delight of the bhakta and the divine science of the knower of Brahman. So both these are in fact also a part of spirituality. That's what here the implication is, that love is what bhakti is about, knowledge is what the jnani is about, the one who knows the Brahman, one who has experienced it and has experiential knowledge of Brahman. So love and knowledge both are a part of that spiritual world. They have to effect their unity. Love and knowledge, the delight of the bhakta and the divine science of the knower of Brahman have to effect their unity, and both have to recover the fullness of life, which they tend to banish from them in the austerity of their search or the rapture of their ecstasy. So, again, Sri Aurobindo is giving a reason why they have to work out this unity. Why love and bhakti are alone not enough? Why knowledge alone is not enough? Why? Because this exclusiveness not only excludes fullness, because fullness will always mean that don't leave anything out. But what is happening in the process, if we try to be exclusive, is that these tendencies tend to banish throughout in the austerity of their search or the rapture of their ecstasy. So, on one hand, the one who is obsessed with knowledge has the austerity of search. Austerity means dead seriousness, keep everything out except what is absolutely important. So, only knowledge is important, so that leads to a certain type of austerity of the intellect. And what does that exclude? That excludes the rapture of ecstasy which the bhakta has. On the other hand, the bhakta has the rapture of ecstasy, but then he is in that process excluding the search for knowledge. So neither of these needs to be excluded, and therefore what we need is a unity. Love and knowledge, the delight of the bhakta and the divine science of the knower of Brahman have to effect their unity, and both have to recover the fullness of life which they tend to banish from them in the austerity of their search or the rapture of their ecstasy. So they get so completely absorbed in either the austerity of search or get completely overwhelmed by the rapture of the ecstasy, and the result is fullness of life gets sacrificed. That's the last paragraph, the short last paragraph in the end. The heart and the mind are one universal deity, and neither a mind without a heart, nor a heart without a mind is the human ideal. So now here comes a sort of the grand synthesis that the heart and the mind are one universal deity, which means actually they are both manifestations of the divine. They are both partial expressions of that same ultimate reality, the highest truth, the absolute reality. They are both expressions of the same. And therefore, neither of these alone could be the human ideal. The ideal would be to reconcile them using that universal truth, the highest truth, as the anchor. And a spark of that highest truth is within us, that is our soul. Nor is any perfection sound and real unless it is also fruitful. Now comes the utilitarian angle, because we live in an era of utilitarianism. That is what science promoted, and therefore, is it necessary just for these vague expressions like the fullness of life and so on, or does it have any real aim which is more sort of clearly visible? Nor is any perfection sound and real unless it is also fruitful. It should lead to some fruitful results. The integral divine harmony within, but as its result. So one result of the synthesis would be a harmony within, that is a peaceful existence within. But as its result, also a changed earth and a nobler and happier humanity. Because this integration in the individual is what will change human nature, and if this happens on a large scale, then typical human nature itself will change, and that will what will lead to a new type of earth and a nobler and happier humanity. So you can see that although it is very, very condensed, but the entire sort of philosophy which emerges through that 6.5 years of writing that followed is packed even in this last paragraph. So with this background, let me go over the page once more. The title is The Needed Synthesis, and the question of the month on the 15th of August 1914, that first issue of the Arya, was, what is the synthesis needed at the present time? Undoubtedly that of man himself. The harmony of his faculties is the condition of his peace, their mutual understanding and helpfulness the means of his perfection. At war, they distract the kingdom of his being. The victory of one at the expense of another maims his self-fulfillment. The peculiar character of our age is the divorce that has been pronounced between reason and faith, the logical mind and the intuitive heart. At first, the declaration of war between them was attended by painful struggles, a faith disturbed or a skepticism dissatisfied. But now their divorce has created exaggerated tendencies which impoverish human life by their mutual exclusiveness. On the one side, a negative and destructive critical spirit, on the other, an imaginative sentiment which opposes pure instinct and a faith founded on dreams to the sterile fanaticism of the intellect. Yet a divorce is impossible. Science could not move a step without faith and intuition, and today it is growing full of dreams. Religion could not stand for a moment if it did not support itself by the intellectual presentation, however inadequate, of profound truths. Today we see it borrowing many of its weapons from the armory of its opponent. But a right synthesis in virtue of a higher and reconciling truth can alone dissipate their mutual misunderstandings and restore to the race its integral self-development. The synthesis then of religious aspiration and scientific faculty as a beginning, and in the resultant progress and integrality also of the inner existence. Love and knowledge, the delight of the bhakta and the divine science of the knower of Brahman have to effect their unity, and both have to recover the fullness of life which they tend to banish from them in the austerity of their search or the rapture of their ecstasy. The heart and the mind are one universal deity, and neither a mind without a heart nor a heart without a mind is the human ideal. Nor is any perfection sound and real unless it is also fruitful, the integral divine harmony within, but as its result, a changed earth and a nobler and happier humanity.